Okay, it is 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time, and today is Monday, February the 28th, the last day of February. Tomorrow will be March 1st, and you know what that means. That's the month that the course actually completes. So, my name is Richard Wright, but you know that already, and you want to make sure that you complete any written assignments from weeks 1 to 3 before the end of this week. At the end of this, there are absolutely no deals. Of course, that doesn't apply to discussion posts, but then also it probably doesn't mean much if you are talking about week 1 or week 2 because we're beyond the 7 days, unless you have extenuating circumstances that I'm aware of. So um, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, so let's start by looking at the course calendar, as I usually do every week. And look at the month view. And this is where we are. Live lecture today. Your initial post is due tomorrow, March 1st. Your reply post is due Saturday, March 5th. So let's take a look at March 5th. And then your written assignments are due with your live lecture and then your written word. Um, I want to let you know that the quiz you took for week 3 was your midterm. And I cautioned everybody to be sure to study and how to prepare for that. Each week I mentioned the practice quizzes and the PowerPoints. And before you take that test, because you're only going to have 2 quizzes in this course. The next one will be based on weeks 4, 5, and 6. Okay. And that will be due on the 18th. If you pay attention to that, that's really almost a little over 2.5 weeks from now the course ends. And so there's no 19th, there is no 20th. Okay. Remember that. Let's go back to that. Okay, let's take a look at week number 4. And let's go over the discussion assignment. So you're going to use this scenario and consider this scenario about what you know about Terry versus Ohio. Terry versus Ohio, for your information, is known as the stop and frisk case. And that's all I'm going to say about that. If you click on that, you can see that. And then address these issues, each of these bullet points, and then reply with another student's bullet point or another student's post. Remember, you have to post first before you can even see it. If you click on this, it should take you to fast case, and there it is. Okay, Terry versus Ohio, and that's kind of the information that you need to see if you were looking at the full case. All right, let's close that down. So that's, of course, you know, the initial post is due tomorrow night, and your reply post is due Saturday. Your written assignment, very important that you pay close attention to this. Examine the type of crimes committed. So you'll examine U.S. Supreme Court cases related to fleeing police. So here is a scenario, and then there's the sample pursuit policy, and then this is a case that you can take a look at. In a minimum of 2 pages, APA citations in the body and a reference page. Okay. Try not to use your textbook too much, but do some research. And you're going to answer each of these questions in that 2-page. Should be double space, people. Anybody submit a single space, you're going to lose points. I'm telling you this up front. Very important that you get this. And it's really important that you get these citations right. If you cite a case, make sure you cite the official court case. All right. And you can always find that. And if you have trouble finding it, reach out to me and I'll guide you to where you can find it. All right. Now, very important, very important. Now, with each of these assignments, it is so important because you can, if you don't have citations in the body, you're going to lose points. You're going to lose 5 to 10 points on a paper, and that can make a difference in your grade. Make sure that you run your papers through Grammarly. Check the plagiarism box to make sure that you have enough critical thinking in your paper. I want to see your analysis, not just what you copy and paste. And then you're going to create a flyer. Make sure that it's original, and you're going to use this information. This is sample statutes, pursuit policies, and a template that you can use just to help you, to guide you in that. It must be in the form of a Word document. Very important, very important. Okay, your written assignments should be submitted as Word documents unless I tell you otherwise. Now, some people have trouble doing zip files. If it was me, I would submit 2 separate files attached to the assignment. File number 1 would be part 1. File number 2 would be part 2. Okay, you only need, now it says you can create your flyer from scratch using Microsoft Word or Publisher. I would prefer you don't use Publisher. Use Word, okay, because I run your papers through Grammarly. Be sure to use the appropriate language and then cite your sources in APA format. You know what that means. I keep saying it over and over. Citations in the body and references at the end. Okay? All right. And then you have your grading rubric, which I provide for you, a little different from the other ones you see. This tells you how to get your points. 25% for part 1, and then if you have your paper is written in the appropriate form, and that you find yourself meeting the 2-page minimum requirement. Spelling errors, paragraphs, double spaced, then your citations, and then you create the flyer, a 1-page minimum. Okay, you do not have to have a reference page for each of these. All right. So now that's your written assignment. And then your live classroom recording, you know what that is. And then you know your live classroom lecture, which is the key phrase that I give you. So we're going to talk about these topics: domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, and disorderly conduct. And then we'll go over this for practice. All right. So now let's talk about domestic terrorism. So what exactly is domestic terrorism? It is, as the FBI has described it, the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or force the government, the civilian population, or any in furtherance of a social or political objective. So it has to be something that goes along with um, um, politics or something like that. For example, the Oklahoma City bombing was an example of terrorism. But we're going to talk about the difference between international and national terrorism, or domestic, which is on our soil. Uh, and terrorists can either be domestic or either international, such as organizations like ISIS, Al Qaeda, and organizations like that. And it can and so it's let's talk about international. So the United States Code defines international terrorism, which is Chapter 18, United States Code. I forget which section. It says international terrorism is, as I said earlier, acts to human life that occur outside of the U.S. or upon U.S. soil by foreign terrorists. So September the 11th was the bombing of the World Trade Centers was on domestic United States soil, but it was a foreign terrorist organization that caused it. Therefore, it becomes international in nature. The example of the Oklahoma City bombing is domestic in nature, and you'll see why in just a few minutes as I talk about that. All right. So there are violations of the laws of the United States or any state that would be a criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of any state. And it appears to, again, remember, to coerce a civilian population, influence government, intimidation, or either affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. So that's what I'm talking about when I said that September the 11th was a conduct by a government and mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. You will find that again, the most classic example is the September the 11th, which some of you may not remember because it happened in 2001, which was 20 years ago, 21 years ago, should I say. All right. Domestic terrorism, on the other hand, is carried out by terrorists within our own country. These are United States citizens and have aims and objectives that are similar to those of international terrorist groups. So the most recent form of domestic terrorism that I know happened January 6, 2021, when the Capitol was attacked and there was sedition and attempt to interfere with a legal process of installing a new administration, as we have done peacefully for years and years and years until then. And so those individuals who are being tried or looked at by this organization and in the Justice Department are individuals who are what we call domestic terrorists. White supremacists are oftentimes considered as domestic terrorists as well. And so the key thing is directly against the government, and the primary target is the government or some entity, as I described. The Olympic Park bombing, in which Eric Rudolph targeted anti-abortion clinics, which resulted in deaths and injuries. And then I already talked about the Oklahoma City bombing with Timothy McVeigh that was involved there, in which a number of people were killed in 1995, and children, women. And the point of that was McVeigh was trying to avenge the handling of an earlier incident at Ruby Ridge in Idaho, where a federal agent was killed along with a 14-year-old child. So McVeigh believed that Ruby Ridge was improperly handled, and so that was his response to kill some more people. Crazy. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation and also Homeland Security work in conjunction on the federal level. And the Justice Department deals with the prosecution of these individuals. And so what happens, though, is that with the federal organizations that I name, the local organizations, the police in the state and local, county, city, uh, are involved in dealing with domestic terrorists. Remember, because the laws are violated in a jurisdiction in the United States. And it explains the role that local police, such as Oklahoma City, a trooper stopped Timothy McVeigh for a minor registration violation, and then realized who he was and apprehended him. Eric Rudolph was uh, apprehended by a patrol officer. He was found lurking behind a strip mall, a closed strip mall. So the key thing that you should be aware is that the federal government works in conjunction with the local authorities to deal with individuals who are engaged in domestic terrorism. Okay? So remember that. Obstruction of justice. So what is it? There's obstruction of justice. It is not just not telling the truth, but what you can do is you can mislead the police or withhold information that prevents the government from effectively investigating a criminal matter. Um, that is something that right now former President Trump is being looked at, because he has taken documents and destroyed them, flushed them down the toilet, um, tore up documents and things of that nature. But one of the most well-known obstruction of justice cases happened here in Chicago, Illinois, involving former actor at Empire, Jesse Smollett, where he lied and said that to the police that he was attacked in a homophobic attack, and that he was attacked by two white men wearing MAGA hats, Make America Great Again hats. Well, it turns out that that wasn't true, that he had actually participated in a scheme with two African brothers, Osendero, I believe was their names, and paid them and to set it up, because he was trying to gain points for salary for his TV show. Well, much money was spent uh, to investigate that crime, many hours of police investigation before it became quite clear that he actually filed a false report. So filing a false report can be deliberately misleading the police. And that's an example of that. In the criminal proceeding itself, or you can have the same thing in a congressional hearing where you commit what we call perjury, when you lie under oath. Now, you have to be under oath at the time you don't tell the truth. So if you see the picture here, this lady is taking an oath to testify and tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth before the judge who's sitting in the background, and also if there's a jury involved, whoever the trier of fact is. And so if you lie on the stand, if you lie while you're under oath, uh, individuals can go to jail for perjury. Obstructing justice in the streets can also occur when you hide somebody. And if you're asked a question and you don't answer it, you can plead the fifth, or you don't have to say anything. But if you do decide to answer or provide information to the police, please be honest with them and tell them the truth. Not because you would be committing perjury, but you'd be charged with misleading the police, obstruction of justice. And these are just some of the things that are involved here. Okay. All right. So now, Terry versus Ohio, which that's the case that involves in your discussion assignment. There are statutes in various jurisdictions, such as Wisconsin and Ohio, where police can ask for identification, and um, it allows them to pat you down, minimal intrusion, to remove a wallet on a person that may establish identification. However, individuals can comply with the failure to ID laws in these various jurisdictions by providing identification or saying what their name is. Not identifying somebody is similar to obstructing in jurisdictions where those statutes exist. Okay. The key thing is cooperate with police. That's the key right there. Resisting arrest. Now, resisting arrest is pretty straightforward. If you are placed under arrest, and how do you know you're placed under arrest? That is when you're in a situation where you're not free to go, and you attempt to resist. Now, I'm not talking about someone putting handcuffs on you and you're wiggling around, but let's say if you're kicking or spitting or something like that, attempting to fight the police officers, then and you know that you are under arrest and you're trying to escape in that instance, then you force the officer to use some extra force. Now, as we already know, that you cannot use force like Derek Chauvin did. That was excessive. Um, and if an individual is in handcuffs, then they're pretty much under your control. But they can still be resisting arrest by kicking and spitting and stuff like that. That didn't happen in that case. So arrest can be made, as we say to students all the time, not necessarily by using the words arrest. You'll see what I'm talking about. Explicit custody leaves little room. For example, when a law enforcement says you're under arrest, that's explicit. Directs the person put their hands behind their back, then that's clearly explicit custody. Implicit custody or implied custody is what a reasonable person would believe at the time of an encounter, when they believe they're not free to leave, as I said earlier. Um, they may perceive that they then are under arrest, and you should not do anything to You don't have to talk. You do not have to talk. And as a matter of fact, that is the point, that if law enforcement officers are going to question you, um, then they should issue the Miranda warnings. You know those, verse on Miranda versus Arizona. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot, a 411 will be appointed for you. Um, do you understand these rights? And you can waive them by starting to talk. But if you at some point says, I don't want to talk, I want my attorney, that's it. They can't question you anymore. Not during that custodial instance. All right. Let's talk about what many states have in terms of resisting arrest. Use the Tennessee statute um, that says resisting, stop, frisk, halt, arrest, or search laws. Resisting by stating it is an offense, which is a class A misdemeanor, for a person to intentionally prevent or obstruct anyone known to be a law enforcement officer um, from stopping, frisking, halting, arresting, or searching a person, including the defendant, by using force against the officer. If you do that in Tennessee and use a deadly weapon, the nature is increased to a class A misdemeanor. Okay. All right. So that's resisting arrest. We got two more topics. Fleeing police. It means what it says. You see that guy running? Now, I hope that that police officer is is reaching for a taser, but that doesn't look like that. It looks like he's reaching for a weapon. Now, if the person is dangerous, has a weapon, and they're fleeing, it's possible that they can use that. However, they should pursue a chase rather than trying to shoot the person. If you remember the case of Walter Scott, which I believe was in North Carolina, South Carolina, where the officer shot him running because he feared what would happen to him. And the police officer shot him and then tried to make it seem as if he had a weapon when he did not have a weapon. And it was caught on video, and that officer ended up going to jail. But uh, fleeing involves running away, getting out of a vehicle, um, and the key thing is that the officer should engage in a foot chase. But um, we're going to spend the rest of our time in this fleeing police talking about vehicle pursuits, because that is probably where we have most of the instances of fleeing or looting, where a person uh, has seen the police chasing them, and they just take off. And they're in a vehicle driving. So what happens is that a chase ensues, and it's very dangerous because the police can hurt someone, or the other car can hurt someone, and attempting to flee and driving at excessive speeds, um, and engaging in reckless driving. So when a police officer, after fleeing a vehicle, they have to ensure that they're doing it consistent with the policies of the department that they work for. So most police departments have what we call um, a, um, a due process, not due regard, a pursuit policy. And the pursuit policy um, sets out the guidelines for law enforcement officers, and they're trained extensively in that and how to deal with that, when to drive after someone at high speed, and how they have to be careful because of the fact that you want to exercise due care for innocent individuals, because that's usually who ends up getting hurt. And so these police pursuit policies uh, involve what time of the day is it that you're involved in this chase, the traffic, uh, what was the offense? Was it like a person stealing a loaf of bread or pack of gum or something that they were trying to say clothing or something like that. The weather and road conditions, and so the ability of the officers and to drive. But anyway, you have to be really careful about these things because there have been so many instances in these uh, chases or times when individuals attempted to flee and the police violated the pursuit policies and there was serious injury. You can still operate within the pursuit policy and still end up injuring or killing another person. So you have to be very, very mindful of protecting the public and protecting your fellow officers and yourself as well. Okay, and so in here, you'll find some sample statutes dealing with fleeing and eluding. Now, we were taught in the police academy what we call stop to force to stop techniques, and we force these individuals to stop by using various ways, such as ramming the motorist, using roadblocks. You've probably seen that. And there are other things that we're going to go into in just a few minutes. But the key thing is to make sure that it's an imminent situation. It says in order to use the techniques, deadly force must be justified. And if you don't have justification for deadly force, then you're going to have a problem. Okay. So the facts of each case determine it, but let's look at some of these examples in our module. A fleeing driver suspected of violent felony increases to 45 and a 30. An attempt to elude the police, but the suspect stops at all lights and uses turn signals. These are not overtly dangerous, and ramming would be bad because when you ram a vehicle, one of the things that could happen is they can lose control and hurt someone innocently. On the other hand, if the scenario where the person is traveling at high rates of speed, such as a 90 and a 30, that's 60 miles over, and makes certain turns, runs, red signals, nearly hits other motorists, ramming could be a justified act. So take a look at this case, Scott versus Harris, for some ideas about how that works. Now we'll conclude with talking about some of the techniques that we use to stop, and you'll be able to see where we force individuals to stop, dealing with what we call pursuit intervention techniques. Now notice what I was telling you earlier. You see the police car, and you see in picture number 1 where the police car is going to want to hit this part of the vehicle to force it to turn this way, as in number 2, and then all the way around. All right. And so what happens is the vehicle can shut off because of that. All kinds of things can make it so that the vehicle doesn't continue to run. It spins. But you have to be careful about the area or the location where you are when you consider doing this. All right. If you're in a high area where there's a dense population, you might have a problem there in that. If you're in an urban area, downtown area, or business area, you might have a problem. Police officers have to be mindful and shouldn't attempt when oncoming traffic or motorists, uh, and such as dealing with bridges and things. Then we have these things called stop sticks. You can see these. You're probably familiar with these, even if you've never been involved in a criminal case. If you've driven into a parking lot and you go the a certain way and you drive in and then you try to get out without paying, and these things will puncture your tires, and you won't be able to go very far or very fast. And so these are used to slow down vehicles because the tires deflate. So what we'll do is we'll take these and we'll spread these across the streets so that when a person, if they try to break through, they'll hit this and they won't lose, they won't blow out, but the tires will gradually start to lose air and they'll slow down. Partial roadblocks, okay, as well. I've been involved in those. I had to deal with those as a police officer. Now, boxing in. Probably one of the most well-known instances of boxing in occurred in 1994 when O.J. Simpson was boxed in by the LA Police Department. And there were cars on each side, all four sides, the front, the back, on the right side, and then in the rear. And it you couldn't go any faster than that. And so the suspect is can ram any of these squad cars, but if the suspect is armed, then some of the squads might end up firing shots, or shots are fired. So these are just some of the techniques used to stop and um, minimize life injuries as well as property damage. Okay. We conclude with disorderly conduct. So what is the First Amendment say? It says you have a right to the freedom of speech, assembly, religion, the press. Now, you can picket, you can protest, you can march, but it must be peacefully. It must be within the confines of the requirements, sometimes, of the jurisdiction where you do it, such as, for example, protest march, which is sometimes happen spontaneously, but then other times they will happen where permits are granted. And you can find yourself, for example, I remember in Illinois here years ago, the Nazis or the Ku Klux Klan wanted to march through a Jewish community of Skokie, Illinois, and they got the constitutional right. They had a permit, and the police provided protection. Disorderly conduct, though, can come when you do things to intimidate people, to force them to respond, such as using obscenities, profanity, boisterous language. The key thing is you're breaching the peace, okay? Or as we call it, disturbing the peace, okay? And then finally, a riot, or as we define it in Black's Law Dictionary, which is a special dictionary that we lawyers use quite frequently, law students, uh, as a as tumultuous disturbance of the peace by three or more persons assembling with the intent to assist each other. Uh, and what it is you are going to create a disturbance of the peace. Riots will often result in significant property loss, possible physical harm, and death to some people. Okay, you can look at this video, which is 35 minutes long, and get more details on that. Okay, and that's it. We're going to first go over key terms. I'll give you the key phrase. So here are the key terms. We talked about each of these today. All of these were covered in the lecture, and you'll want to pay close attention to these because it's going to be showing up on that exam when you get to week 6. Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at the practice. These are practice questions, which I like to take a few and go over. Since there's nobody here, I'll just take 2 of them. A man is walking in the middle of the street in a busy downtown entertainment district yelling profanities. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? Based on what I said, it is disorderly conduct, and that is correct. Number 2, abortion activists are standing on a street corner holding signs of aborted fetuses that some citizens have said is offensive. Is this considered as free speech or disorderly conduct? It's free speech, even if you don't like it. Okay, so you go through the rest of those questions. And then the ultimate, dare I say again, a warning, I say it every week. Watch these questions, some variations of these questions, or exactly will appear in the quiz for week 6. A local resident is suspected of setting off a trunk bomb at a religious temple, intentionally targeting parishioners. This is an example of what? A local resident. So it's because in their own country against a citizen, government, or segment. Okay. Number 2, a foreign national, pay attention, in your community is part of a terrorist organization from another country, pay attention to that, and intentionally blows up a city hall building to avenge the death of others in this country. This is an example of what? Is it domestic terrorism, eco-terrorism, state-sponsored? It's international, carried out by outside entity, even though it happened on our soils. Okay, and that's it. That's it. So now the question of what do we want to do for the key phrase? And I'll give it to you. We talked about it in detail at the beginning, and it happens in our country. And the example took place with the Oklahoma City bombing. Domestic terrorism is the key for your points today. Give me domestic terrorism and you'll have your points. All right, guys, I will see you next week. Again, get those assignments in and take care of yourself. Good night.